Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 369. And we are back today for our first episode of our Rut Fresh Radio mini-series for 2020, in which we are getting the latest reports from across the country on current deer activity, behavior, and what you need to do right now to fill your tag. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Onyx. As you just heard, we are back with a new season of Rut Fresh Radio. If you're new to the Wired to Hunt podcast, this is something we do every single year during hunting season. Myself and co-producer Spencer Newharth rock out an extra episode every week of this series in which we get hot intel from different deer hunters all across the country each week, telling us, what kind of deer activity we're seeing, how are current conditions impacting deer behavior, what types of things right now would be working as far as tips and tactics. That's the kind of stuff we're going to cover. In just a minute, I'm going to hop over to a quick introductory conversation that myself and Spencer Newharth had. I'm on the road hunting in Idaho, so you're going to hear me calling in from the phone, but you'll hear Spencer and I kick things off, and then we'll get to Spencer's interviews with 4 different hunters from across the country, getting all sorts of interesting insights, and then make sure to stay tuned for one of these each Wednesday throughout the rest of the fall. It's going to get you the best updated information you could possibly ask for coming into your hunts. So, without further ado, let's kick it to the intro to this season of Rut Fresh Radio.
Spencer, it is good to be back doing a Rut Fresh Radio with you, my friend.
Yeah, this feels the most normal out of 2020. As I shoot my bow and prep for a hunt and look at Onyx, that's one thing that feels normal in a time of a lot of things not feeling normal.
That is true. And what else is normal for Rut Fresh Radio is me calling in from a pickup truck on my phone while I'm driving back from a hunt. So we're kicking it off on a strong note, man.
I dig it.
Yes, but we're looking for the freshest, hottest intel anywhere in the world, right? So you can't get it better than really right off the tree stand, right?
That's right. That's why I like these calls.
Yeah. So, anyone listening has already heard my very brief intro giving you the 15-second rundown of what these episodes are all about. Anyone who's been a long-time listener of Wired to Hunt knows what Rut Fresh Radio is about. But I don't know, you've been doing this now 4 years, Spencer? Is this our season?
This is the 5th season.
5th season?
I think we started in 2016, so 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20.
That's crazy. So 5 years in of doing these now, if you were to make the sales pitch to someone tuning into this kind of thing for the first time, now that you've done it for 5 years, you've got all the experience, you know what this is all about, you know what folks that have listened have thought about it. What's the Spencer Newharth pitch on Rut Fresh Radio? Why should people be tuning in every week for this?
Rut Fresh Radio is the most timely deer movement reports that you can possibly get. And in every episode, we're going to talk to 4 or 5 experts throughout the country and hear about what they've been doing. We're going to talk about different things like moon phases and weather patterns and crop status and browse status, hunting pressure, sign making, everything that's relevant to a whitetail hunter. We're going to talk about it. We're going to hear about their tips and tactics. And then we also sort of have a forecast on deer movement. And we do this all in about a 30-minute episode to make it super digestible, the sort of thing you can listen to on your drive to work or put it on over your lunch break. And you're going to come away hopefully learning something and then using the information that you hear our experts talk about and apply it to your hunts coming up over the weekend.
And this is particularly important for a lot of folks right now because there's a lot of opening days that either just happened or are about to happen, right? There's like September 12th, I think, opens in Minnesota or Wisconsin or something like that. And Missouri always opens the 15th. And I don't know, a bunch of states I know are opening up here pretty soon. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that are antsy, getting amped to get in the woods and want that latest information. So the question then is this, Spencer: do you have the goods to provide the people this week that are going to be hitting the woods for the first time?
We have the goods. We talked to 4 hunters this week, Nebraska, South Carolina, North Dakota, and Kentucky, and 2 of them were successful and just killed deer within the last couple days here. And when I say, that we have like the most relevant, timely info, I genuinely mean it, because we're talking to people like you, Mark, that just got in their pickup out of the tree stand, or we're talking to somebody that just got done gutting a buck, stuff like that. But this week we talked to Tyler Jones from the Element Podcast in Nebraska, Richard Peoples in South Carolina, and then in North Dakota from Whitetail DNA, we talked to Alex Comstock, and then Greg Farrell from First Light in Kentucky.
Beautiful. Do we have any kind of high-level takeaway, or do we have something that we should be listening into particular as we listen to these interviews so that we get the most out of it?
I don't know that there's like one big takeaway from this week. Something that I think is really interesting is 2 of the hunters we talked to this week were hunting public land. 2 of them were hunting private land. And you'll sort of hear the difference in urgency when you talk to those hunters. Tyler and Alex were traveling bow hunters out of state on public land, and they're just a little bit more aggressive. Like, they're hunting in the mornings, and they're looking for sign, and they're getting closer to bedding and things like that. And then you have like Richard Peoples in South Carolina, where he's around these properties a lot more, so it's a lot more conservative approach. And Greg was down at some private ground in Kentucky where he can return to if need be. And so I think, this year you're going to have like some of the biggest discrepancy in how aggressive a hunter is based on like if they're traveling out of state, if they're hunting private ground or public ground. And I'm guessing you'll hear some things, Mark, that are pretty relatable to your early September hunts being in Idaho.
Yeah, that's the truth. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I don't want to give too much away about the Idaho hunt because the main episode of Wired to Hunt this week is going to be the full recap of that trip. But definitely we have had to approach things in a very different way that I would ever hunt private land, that I could, have multiple opportunities at throughout the rest of the year. We've been very aggressive. We've had to do a lot of different things. We've had to hunt mornings. We've had to hunt bedding areas. We've had to, done just about everything but ride a unicycle upside down. So it's been a trip, man. I'll tell you what. My teaser for tomorrow's podcast is that it has been a trip. But yes, I am interested to hear what these folks have to say. And to your point, not only does weather and time of year and all these different factors influence what you should be doing as a deer hunter and when you should be hunting certain places, but also where you're hunting, public versus private. So I think that's something, as you point out, for us to key into throughout the whole year.
And if you're new to the podcast, you'll learn that I ask everybody the exact same question at the beginning and the end of the phone call. And I'm going to ask them to you, Mark, because you've been at this for about a week now. So In Idaho, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the buck activity has been? And then in the coming week, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think that buck activity is going to be in Idaho?
It has been a 5.75. So I say that because we have seen some nice, without giving too much away, we've seen some good bucks and we've seen a good number of deer. But almost all of the movement every day has been in the last half hour to 45 minutes. So it's been very late movement and just a very quick little blip. And you've had to try to take advantage of that. So it's a little above average because we're seeing quite a few, but it's not like rampant. That's my answer for your first question. And did you already ask the second question? It's
yes.
Late. I don't know if you did. So what do I think is it going to be moving forward? I think it's going to get better because it has been in the 90s here for most of the week that we've been hunting. It's been super crazy hot, and a cold front just hit today. And so today was the first day of the cold front. I got to believe it's going to keep on getting better. So I'm going to give it a 7 moving forward, as I think these deer will be hitting the feed bag, and where they've not been crazy pressured, I'm sure they've been moving pretty well.
All right, Mark, well, I think that's a good teaser for tomorrow's episode, and I think that's a good way to set the table for the rest of our episode and the beginning of Season 5 of Rut Fresh Radio.
Sounds good to me, Spencer. Take it away.
Talk to you next week, Mark. All right, and joining us on the line now is Tyler Jones from the Element Podcast. Now, Tyler, in Nebraska, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
Man, I'm going to give it a 5 probably. I know that's kind of right in the middle, but it depends on really whether you're talking about the rut or whether you're talking about morning or evening movement. The evening movement was a lot shorter lived, it seemed like. The morning movement seemed to last longer, and I think the cool weather had something to do with that. But, you know, the heat of the afternoon you tended to see buck movement right around sunset or a little early if you were lucky. But it was good. That early season pattern is something that we were definitely seeing, and we were able to kind of gain momentum on.
Were you seeing a lot of bucks still in bachelor groups in Nebraska?
Not really, no. And we hunted a portion of the state, not necessarily just one area, and across the board. If they were in a bachelor group, we probably didn't see any more than 2 bucks together, and lots of loner bucks for sure. Even the smaller bucks were by themselves.
What food sources were you focused on all week?
Well, we went into the hunt with the plan to focus on the green food sources like alfalfa and beans, and ended up kind of throughout the hunt figuring out how heavily they were using corn, and all the corn is still up, and it made it very, very difficult for us because, you know, typically what you think of if you hear any kind of media in the whitetail deer hunting world, you're talking about a bed to feed pattern, and bed being in the day, feed being at night. So in the evenings, you're hunting deer that are headed from bedding to the feed, to the food source, these big agricultural fields, cornfields, for example. But these deer are living in corn, and if the corn has a pivot in it, it's got water source for them. And if it's got, and obviously it's got food source for them, and then you've got shade from the heat in those big cornfields, they've got everything they need there. So we almost found like an exact opposite pattern of movement or direction of movement where, I was able to get drawn on a deer that was leaving corn in the evening. So it was kind of weird, but they were coming out of the corn in the evening and kind of just doing some, just random kind of exploring, I guess you could say, in all the brush and the creek bottom and the just, grazing pastures and that kind of thing out of the corn. So it was hard to put that together with it ingrained in your mind that they're going to bed in the brush and feed in the cornfields. It was the exact opposite. And it made it difficult, but we did have a pretty close encounter.
Were you doing any morning hunts in Nebraska?
Yes, we did a few, and most of them were of kind of an observation type of stand. We would try to find a tree that we could see a pretty vast area of, and that way we could pinpoint deer going into the corn. if we didn't hunt out of a tree, we would oftentimes drive. I bet we drove about half the mornings or a little less, and we hunted, the other half. But we would drive, we would get up on hills and glass, and deer were moving a lot in the mornings. I think even in the early season, I totally think hunting in the morning makes sense. I mean, we had the morning before we had the buck encounter on this trip, really close range. We actually had that buck at 100 yards in the morning from our tree. So, I definitely think it's worth it. Probably worth being very conservative and careful, especially if you're hunting a private piece that you don't want to mess up. But probably worth hunting if you can make good plans for it.
This time of year, did water factor into any of your setups at all?
It did, actually. We had 2 fronts in about 5 or 6 days that we hunted, so it was pretty good weather overall. But there was a couple days when it was like low to mid 90s, which from what I understand is pretty hot up there. It's not too hot for Texan, but that was definitely something that played into our last hunt. We kind of sold out. We moved for the last evening, drove about an hour and a half down the road, and set up on a pond that I could see from the aerial was super clear as compared to some of the other tanks around it. And it looked like, to me, that it was going to be spring fed. It was really dry in Nebraska, and all the locals talked about how dry it was this year while I was up there. So I thought, well, it's hard to find a tank or a pond that's got water in it right now. And so this spring fed pond, if it is spring fed, in fact, should have some deer around it. It's about a mile in, and we went in and hunted it. It had water quite a bit, and we had a really good hunt that evening. Actually, we saw about 15 deer, and we just didn't have any bucks that we felt we needed to take home come by us that evening. But I think it's definitely a tactic if you get some heat this time of year, for sure.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Nebraska?
It's a good question. I think that, that we're going to see cold weather coming in across most of the U.S., and I think that the big, massive cold front is going to push a lot of animals around, and I think that it's going to get them up on their feet. It looks like not just cold weather, but some snow and stuff like that. And I don't know exactly what the forecast is for Nebraska going forward. I'm kind of thinking about Colorado, but I would assume that with that cooler weather that the deer are really going to start moving around. I don't know what that does to the corn crop. I don't know what colder temps might do to that crop and with the farmers and when they would pull out corn and that kind of thing. But I would assume that just overall general movement, being that it seemed like it was good in the mornings or better in the mornings than the evenings because of the cool weather, I would assume that cooler weather could definitely bump the movement up. So I would say, like, if you're looking to hunt on an early season pattern, you've got, you're going to look at like a 6 or 7 on the movement scale. And hopefully that leads us into some pre-rut stuff.
All right, Tyler, great intel. Good luck with the rest of your season, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me, Spencer.
All right, and joining us on the podcast next is Richard Peoples in South Carolina. Now, Richard, in South Carolina, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
So I think as we're moving into September, and right now our buck movement has been about a 2 to a 2.5. Everything seems to be really nocturnal right now. And hopefully pushing forward, we're going to start to get into this next moon phase, and our buck activity will pick back up more in daylight, probably more in the mornings and afternoons. But as of right now, we're probably sitting at like a 2.5 for daylight activity for bucks.
South Carolina has one of the earliest openers in the country, and I know you've been hunting since the middle of August. So how has deer movement changed in the last 3 weeks or so?
Well, as we're in our summer pattern and the deer are in velvet and they're really bachelored up, depending on your food sources on your properties or where you hunt, your daylight activity can be really good. If you have a good solid food source and the bachelor group goes to bedding, a lot of times you have a lot of daylight activity. My properties, I have food plots and feeders set up all year round. So my daylight activity is really good in the mornings and really good in the afternoons. But as the season opens and they start feeling that pressure, Your daylight activity starts to go down as we start to move into September, and that's kind of where we're at right now. It's just that transitional period between velvet summer patterns. We strip velvet, and now we have that lull between velvet and then pre-rut, and a lot of stress on the animals as we have hunting season now, and we're kind of in that lull period where everything's nocturnal.
You mentioned food sources. What are some of the food sources that hunters should be keyed in on in that part of the country right now?
Well, if you have beans are king. If you have a big bean field, you're ruling the roost right now. Most deer this time of year are traveling miles to get to a good bean field. I have some food plots planted in astronomy and clover, which astronomy, if you guys don't know, is also known as deer fetch, which is very attractive as soon as it starts to bloom. And that and some clover and some clay peas is what I have planted right now. With also, I was running protein and corn over the summer, which now we're switching more into just strictly corn. But if you have a big bean field, maybe even a cut corn field, those can also be very good food attractants.
It looks like the weather in that part of the country is pretty stagnant for the next week or so. Do you have any special tactics or tips for people that are hunting when the weather's just 80 to 90 degrees every single day for like the next 10 days?
Well, right now I've been checking the weather too, because this is strictly when I hunt is on when we get a cold front come down right now. And it looks like over the next 3 weeks, actually, we have a couple, I say cold fronts, but basically they're just low pressures moving down through the south. And it will lower our temperatures, for that 3 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock range down into the 60 degrees. So I'm looking for that first movement in daylight, maybe just stretch us out in after gray daylight and do hunting hours or legal shooting hours, where maybe you get that 5 minutes where you get a buck moving in there. But that it's so hard right now this time of year with it being 90 degrees in the afternoon. So if you do get one of those low pressures and it gets you down in that 60 to 63 degree range in the morning, maybe one of your bucks will stick around long enough to be able to get a shot on them.
Early season in South Carolina is also your hurricane season. How do things change, and how does your hunting change when you have a hurricane move in?
Hurricane's approaching. First thing first, let's get prepared for the hurricane, make sure everything's good there. But for deer movement and for hunting, when you are prepared, your house and all that, you got all your supplies. As the hurricane's moving in, you're going to start to get a big pressure change, and deer and all the animals feel that pressure change. They know what's going on in the atmosphere and with the weather. So you're going to get a big movement of whitetail or of deer at some point. And they're going to be hitting the food because they're going to have to be bedded up for however long. So your food sources, again, are going to be key to that, pressure change as some kind of storm system is moving in.
Do you notice any shift in bedding from mid-August until right now for mature bucks?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely notice a shift in bedding. And there's summer patterns when they're all bachelored up. If we do have a heavy rainfall year, they're going to be up on the high ground in your planted pines. Normally your pines that have been planted in the last 10 years that are probably 6 to 8 feet high, where there's a lot of vegetation, and they can get in there and be able to get in the shade and bed down in there. Earlier in the year, and I try to key in on those kind of bedding sources.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in South Carolina?
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting a low pressure system that's kind of going to come through this week. So I'm hoping on the mornings are definitely going to be better, and I'm just going to try to catch that first hour of daylight. I'm just hoping a buck stays up on their feet for that extra 10 minutes right now, or 15 minutes past legal shooting light, and maybe just catch them slipping. Other than that, it's very hit or miss in the afternoons, and I'm not seeing any deer movement on my cameras or while I'm in the stand for the afternoons.
All right, Richard, well, I hope things turn around for you in South Carolina. Good luck, and thanks for joining me.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good luck to everybody.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Alex Comstock in North Dakota from Whitetail DNA. Now, Alex, in North Dakota, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'd say the last week it's probably been at about an 8. We've had some really good weather conditions in North Dakota that elicited quite a bit of movement. And we had 6 guys in deer camp over opening weekend, and pretty much I think every guy was seeing shooter bucks or having encounters with shooter bucks.
A couple nights ago, you arrowed an awesome deer. Tell us about that hunt.
Yeah, so that was actually a morning hunt. We got a substantial cold front that rolled through on Sunday night into Monday, and so typically early season I'm focusing on evening hunts, as getting into a morning spot can be rather difficult. But with it went from in the 80s to in the 40s, and so we slipped into a spot in the morning. We were in some oaks about 50 yards off a bean field, and we got set up about an hour and a half before first light. And as soon as it got light out, I could see deer out, just shadows out in the beans, and there's a ton of deer in the beans, and they started working their way back towards me into the woods, towards their bedding, and had a nice mature 8-pointer come through and kind of just read the script and was able to arrow them at 30 yards working a scrape, actually. So it was pretty cool.
Hunting early season in the mornings, how close to the bedding are you actually getting?
We weren't terribly close to the bedding. I'd say within a few hundred yards, but we had to come through, I guess, where they probably were headed more to bed, and so that was why we wanted to get in so early, because typically in the morning the deer are already usually back to bed or close, and so on a typical morning you probably are going to be busting deer going out, but with the giant cold front that had rolled through, that allowed us, I think, to slip in essentially in the back door and have a successful hunt.
You mentioned that buck was working a scrape. Did you see a lot of sign making when you were in North Dakota?
The last couple of days I did. So I think, kind of as soon as, as their velvet's getting ready to come off, or as they're shedding velvet, they're starting to actually work the ground and start making these scrapes. And, using them more, I think, is just a communication tool. But there was a couple of spots we had where scrapes were popping up that weren't there, opening night, and were there 2 days later.
Early season in a western state on public land, what are the specific things that you're looking for when you set a tree stand right now?
I'm looking for areas that aren't getting hunting pressure, that are close to, usually bean fields are kind of the food source that I'm seeing most of the deer on. And I'm trying to find areas that are secluded. So that's what we were really noticing, was areas that were secluded, that were back, you couldn't see from the road, where you could get in and there was no hunting pressure. We were seeing a lot of deer movement in areas like that.
Besides beans, what other food sources are you looking for this time of year?
Other than beans, there are a lot of wheat fields that it seemed to me that as soon as they get cut, the deer were hitting them. And wheat fields this time of year, especially in areas like North Dakota, are getting cut right now. So a fresh cut wheat field, we had a couple spots like that would butt up to either some cattail sloughs for bedding or a standing cornfield, something like that, where it gave them still some cover. Because the one thing with the cut wheat field is you have no cover at all, and so something like that can be definitely something to key on.
When you're planning a hunt for September, does water factor into your decision making at all?
It typically does. We have a couple spots, one in particular where actually another guy killed in camp on second night. That's really close to a pond. We weren't hunting directly over it, but definitely if you can find a good water source, I find that to be pretty important.
After spending about a week in North Dakota, what percentage of bucks would you say right now are still in velvet?
I'd say probably only about 20%. Most of the bucks I was seeing were already hard-horned.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in North Dakota?
I put it at about a 5 or a 6. The temperatures overall are going to be not bad compared to year over year, as it'll be in the low to mid 70s. But after getting that initial cold front where it was down, today the high was 50. It's going to kind of go up from there. So I put it back down to about a 5 or 6.
All right, Alex. Well, congrats again on the awesome buck. Good luck for the rest of your season. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Spencer.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Greg Farrell from First Light in Kentucky. Now, Greg, in Kentucky, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say where we are, we're in Butler County. It's probably been about a 7. Right now, we've noticed that bucks are definitely still on the tail end of their summer pattern. So we were able to find them and kind of hone in on them based off of those feeding patterns, that you're used to seeing in these early fall, late summer months. So coming out into the fields, still half an hour, 45 minutes before dark. So because of that, the fact that they're still on some of those summer feeding patterns, it's actually been pretty good by us.
You just arrowed a great buck last night. Tell us about that hunt.
Yeah, so we kind of came in blind to this property that we're hunting this week. We got in day before season opened and did some scouting from a distance, basically through spotters and binos. And then our game plan for this week, since we had never hunted this property, was to kind of play it conservative, at least the first 3 days, figure out what those deer are doing, then just kind of slowly chip away at them, getting closer and closer to bedding areas, but doing so in a way that we weren't busting them out of there in the first few days. So this is kind of the culmination of that. It was a buck we found the first night actually in a bachelor group when we were doing that scouting. And after this was the third sit, so basically just kind of moving closer and closer, learning about where they were coming out and kind of what they were feeding towards. And eventually was able to get in the right tree, slip an arrow in them at about 40 yards.
You mentioned that those deer are still in their summer pattern. How much longer do you think that summer pattern is going to last?
Where we are, I think you probably have maybe throughout this week, depending on, geographically where you're located, in reference to where we are in Kentucky. Really for us, especially like Friday and Saturday. So Friday was scouting, Saturday was first day of season. In both of those sits, we were seeing a lot of bucks still in bachelor groups, definitely still on those feeding patterns, and kind of following the same script every night, which, is indication of summer feeding patterns for sure. But actually, interestingly enough, the few days after that, a few of these bachelor groups that we had been watching started to lose 1, 2, 3 of those deer and break up. And then actually the deer that I shot last night, he was actually fully solo last night, and when we recovered him, he was actually starting to lose some of the velvet on one of his sides. So I think within the next probably 5 to 7 days, in the majority of the state, you're going to see that transition of deer off of that summer pattern into more of an early fall range and pattern.
With this being your first trip to the property, I assume that you threw up some trail cameras while you were there. Where are you focusing your trail cameras this time of year?
Yeah, we definitely did. And like I said, our strategy, because we had not set foot on this, we did a ton of e-scouting, and we were pretty confident that we had both bedding, travel corridors, and evening feeding pegged down. But without actually having hunted this property, we wanted to make sure that we had that figured out before we went tromping in. So what we tried to do is we put a bunch of cell cameras up actually on field edges as to not be intrusive, but kind of use it as like a confirmation on the data that we were finding during our hunts and our scouting. Now, as the hunt goes on, we still have one guy in camp with a tag. We're kind of changing our strategy. So we're getting a little bit more aggressive, moving in a little bit closer to where these bucks are bedding, and we're moving our cameras with us as we do that. Not making specific trips in to hang cameras, but as we're moving in through these areas to, do hanging hunts essentially every night, bringing those cameras in with us as a confirmation of that information.
Besides beans, what other food sources should hunters be focused on in Kentucky?
Right now, honestly, I would say beans would be the primary. By us, they're still green. I know as we were kind of traveling to the property, we did see some fields that were starting to turn brown, but with those green bean food sources, they're definitely honed in on those. It seems like the areas that have corn, it's more holding deer than they're hitting too hard. They seem to still be coming out of the corn and heading towards those beans. So whether you have beans on your property or a neighboring property, I would be focusing on understanding that those deer eventually want to be in those bean fields at night while they're still green and before they're kind of browning up.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Kentucky?
I would say you're going to see a drop from that, like 6, 7, like we've been seeing, probably down to, 4s, maybe even 3s as those bucks kind of go a bit more nocturnal and get into their solo fall kind of patterns, both feeding, bedding, travel corridors, etc.
All right, Greg, well, congrats again on the awesome buck. Good luck for the rest of your season. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And that concludes the first episode of Season 5 of Rut Fresh Radio. Thanks to Tyler, Richard, Alex, and Greg for joining me, and thank you guys for listening. I'm thrilled that fall is here, and I look forward to the next 15 weeks of recording these episodes and talking deer hunting on every Wednesday this fall. If you like this podcast, then make sure you're regularly checking out themeateater.com. We're going to have tons of written reports that are just like this podcast, as well as a bunch of great articles from me, Mark Kenyon, Tony Peterson, and others. I'll talk to you guys again next week. Until then, stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.